If I have to fix one more malfunctioning toilet because some graviton decided to flush their crystalline waste down it, I'm going to start charging premium rates, Kaz'rix Martinez muttered, wiping sweat from his brow as he crawled through the maintenance shaft of Intergalactic Station Beta-7. The station's artificial gravity made the tight space feel even more claustrophobic, but at least it kept his tools from floating away. A chorus of mechanical chirps from his universal translator indicated an incoming message. Maintenance Engineer Martinez, your presence is requested in Residential Block X7. Environmental control malfunction. Again, Kaz'rix groaned, already changing direction. Those environmental controls were just calibrated last week. He could practically hear his father's voice. Mijo, you could have been a doctor, but no, you had to go fix space toilets. The truth was, Kaz'rix loved his job, even if he complained about it constantly. Being one of the few humans on an intergalactic station meant he was uniquely suited for maintenance work. Unlike many species, humans could handle a wide range of temperatures, pressures, and atmospheric conditions. Plus, their smaller size compared to most spacefaring races meant they could access areas others couldn't. As he emerged from the shaft into the bustling main corridor, he dodged a lumbering Krov-D, whose massive frame took up most of the walkway. The station was a marvel of xenological engineering, with separate atmospheric zones for different species all seamlessly integrated. It was like a massive apartment complex for the galaxy's most diverse residents, complete with all the problems that came with any large residential building. The familiar sight of iridescent scales caught his attention as he approached Block X7. Engineer Martinez, a melodic voice called out. It was Jiara, one of the Exilith residents he'd grown fond of over the past year. The Exilith were a serpentine species, with brilliant scales that shifted colors with their emotions. Currently, Jiara's scales were cycling through shades of warm yellow, their equivalent of a smile. How many times do I have to tell you? It's just Kaz'rix, he said, grinning. Let me guess, environmental controls acting up again. Yes, the temperature keeps fluctuating. It's particularly difficult for little V-Land to regulate his body temperature on cue. A smaller Exilith head poked out from behind Jiara, scales flickering between curious blue and shy purple. Hey there, Trouble. Kaz'rix waved at the child. Still practicing those maintenance terms I taught you. V-Land's scales brightened to an excited orange. Hydrospanner, quantum calibrator, sonic wrench, he chirped proudly, his translator struggling to keep up with his enthusiastic outburst. Perfect pronunciation. You'll be taking my job soon, Kaz'rix laughed, pulling out his diagnostic tablet. Now let's see what's wrong with these controls. Probably another quantum fluctuation in the primary coolant system. As he worked, V-Land watched with fascination, asking questions that Kaz'rix answered with exaggerated patience. The child's parents had been initially wary of their offspring spending time with a human, but Kaz'rix's gentle demeanor and genuine interest in their culture had won them over. You know, Kaz'rix said as he adjusted the final settings, humans have a saying, a watched pot never boils, but in your case, little one, watching might actually help you learn something useful. He winked at V-Land, who attempted to mimic the gesture with his inner eyelid, resulting in a comical twitch that made both of them laugh. The environmental controls hummed back to life, and the temperature began stabilizing. Jiara's scales shifted to a grateful green. Thank you, Engineer. Kaz'rix, your skills are invaluable to our community. Just doing my job, he replied with a modest shrug. Though if you really want to thank me, maybe convince the station council that humans deserve bigger quarters? I'm tired of having to duck through doorways designed for microbian inhabitants. As he packed up his tools, Kaz'rix couldn't help but smile. Sure, he spent his days fixing toilets and environmental controls, but he was also building bridges between species, one repair job at a time. Even if those bridges occasionally needed their own maintenance. Little did he know, his unique position as the station's human maintenance engineer was about to become far more important than anyone could have anticipated. Kaz'rix was elbow deep in a power conduit when the first explosion hit. The blast rippled through the station with enough force to rattle his teeth, and for one terrifying moment, artificial gravity flickered. Tools clattered around him as emergency klaxons began their haunting wail. Oh, that's definitely not a toilet problem, he muttered, already scrambling out of the maintenance shaft. His comm unit erupted with a cacophony of panicked voices in multiple languages, the translation software struggling to keep up. Alert. Alert. Containment breach in residential block X7. Fire detected. Secondary explosions imminent. All residents proceed to emergency stations. The AI's calm voice somehow made everything worse. Kaz'rix's blood ran cold. X7. The Xylith quarters. He sprinted down the corridor, his maintenance override codes already queued up on his tablet. The station's emergency protocols were activating, bulkheads beginning to seal off affected areas. Through the reinforced windows, he could see thick, purple smoke billowing from the residential section. Status report. He barked into his comm as he ran. Primary fire suppression systems non-responsive. The AI replied. Secondary systems compromised. Chemical composition of smoke indicates burning ceruleum fuel lines. Toxicity levels critical for most species. Most species, Kaz'rix demanded, skidding around a corner. Humans show 47% higher tolerance to. Another explosion rocked the station, cutting off the AI. This one was closer, and Kaz'rix had to brace himself against a wall to stay upright. The acrid smell of burning ceruleum began seeping through the ventilation system. When he reached the entrance to Block X7, chaos reigned. Station security, their environmental suits glowing with emergency lights, were coordinating evacuation efforts. Beings of all species rushed past him, some carrying belongings, others helping those who were struggling. Martinez Chief Security Officer Kaz'rix's crystalline form sparkled with stress fractures, the Petroxian equivalent of sweating. Block is nearly cleared, but fires spreading faster than predicted. Ceruleum explosion took out the main suppression grid. The Xylith, Kaz'rix demanded, already knowing the answer wouldn't be good. The serpentine species was especially vulnerable to heat and toxic fumes, their sensitive scales providing little protection against either. Most evacuated, but Kaz'rix was interrupted by a frantic Jira slithering towards them, scales flashing alarming patterns of distress. Elan, the universal translator, couldn't fully convey the panic in the parent's voice. He was in the teaching pod when the explosion, the emergency doors sealed. Kaz'rix's tablet was already displaying the station schematics. The teaching pod was located near the ceruleum fuel lines, now a maze of fire and toxic smoke. Standard emergency protocols had sealed it off to prevent the spread of fire, but that meant temperature in affected sections exceeding 200 degrees Celsius. The AI helpfully informed them. Structural integrity at 64% and declining. Xylith physiology cannot survive current conditions for more than 2.3 minutes of exposure. Another explosion shook the station, this one accompanied by the screech of tearing metal. Through the emergency windows, Kaz'rix could see the fire spreading, purple flames licking at the walls. The ceruleum would keep burning until it ran out of fuel or oxygen. The station's standard fire suppression chemicals were useless against it. No rescue teams can enter, Kaz'rix stated, their crystalline form vibrating with frustration. The environmental suits aren't rated for these temperatures, and the smoke would corrode their seals in minutes. Zira's scales had turned a sickly gray of despair. Around them, more explosions rocked the station as the fire found new fuel lines to consume. The security teams were falling back, sealing more bulkheads to contain the spreading inferno. Kaz'rix stared at the schematics on his tablet, his mind racing. The teaching pod's location, the failed systems, the toxic smoke. It was a death trap for almost any species in the galaxy. Almost any species. What's the exact composition of that smoke, he asked, already shrugging off his tool belt. The AI rattled off a string of chemical compounds that meant nothing to most beings present, but Kaz'rix had studied station engineering. He knew what it meant. Human respiratory systems can filter approximately 82% of current toxic elements, the AI added. Survival probability in affected areas 12.4% for average human physiology. Only 12.4%, Kaz'rix barked out a laugh that held no humor. Better odds than I got on my engineering finals. He started removing his outer work jacket, checking that his boots were properly sealed. Martinez, no, Kaz'rix's crystals pulsed with alarm. That's a suicide run. Station protocols explicitly forbid. Good thing I've got a terrible memory for protocols, Kaz'rix interrupted, tapping commands into his tablet. Overriding emergency seals on Section 7B through 7F, Authority Code Martinez Alpha 3-9. Override accepted, the AI confirmed. Warning: this action violates 17 different safety protocols and... Mute AI warnings, Kaz'rix commanded, pushing past the security team. He paused only briefly beside the distraught exilith parent. I'm going to get him back. Humans are stubborn like that. Before anyone could stop him, he punched in the final override code. The emergency door slid open with a hiss, releasing a wave of superheated air and purple smoke. Without hesitation, Kaz'rix stepped through, the door sealing behind him. Time to find out if being human is enough of a superpower, he muttered, and plunged into the Inferno. The moment Kaz'rix stepped into Block X7, he understood why the environmental suits wouldn't last. The heat slammed into him like a physical wall, and the purple smoke made his eyes water instantly. His lungs burned with each breath, but they kept working. Millions of years of evolution had given humans remarkably adaptable respiratory systems. Really wish I'd paid more attention in xenobiology class. Right about now, he wheezed, crouching low where the smoke was thinnest. The maintenance corridors he'd crawled through countless times had transformed into a labyrinth of purple flame and twisted metal. His comm crackled. Martinez, your life signs are already showing strain. Kaz'rix's voice came through, distorted by interference. The ceruleum fire is affecting our sensors. We're flying blind here. Join the club, Kaz'rix coughed, navigating by memory. The teaching pod was 3 sections away, but the direct route was blocked by flames. You know what would be really helpful right now? If someone had approved my request to install those emergency bypass tunnels I suggested last month. This is hardly the time. Oh, I think it's exactly the time. Another explosion rocked the section, and Kaz'rix dove behind a support beam as debris rained down. Just saying, a little human foresight goes a long way. The station's AI cut in, its voice glitching. Warning: structural integrity of Section 7C dropping below 50%. Recommend immediate evacuation of all. All it looped for a moment before falling silent. Great, even the AI's abandoning ship, Kaz'rix muttered. The heat was becoming unbearable, his skin feeling like it was about to blister. Human tolerance for extreme temperatures was impressive among galactic species, but even they had limits. He checked his tablet, now showing multiple warning signs. The teaching pod's environmental systems were failing, and the temperature inside was rising rapidly. Exilith physiology was delicate, their scales needed specific conditions to function properly. At these temperatures, they'd essentially cook from the inside out. How's VLAN holding up, he asked, forcing himself forward despite the growing pain in his lungs. Life signs are weakening, Kaz'rix replied grimly. The pod's shielding is the only thing keeping him alive, but it's failing. We've got maybe 10 minutes before the security chief didn't finish the sentence. Kaz'rix's mind raced as he analyzed his options. The standard rescue protocols were useless. They'd been designed with environmental suits in mind, not crazy humans running into infernos. The station's safety measures, normally a blessing, were now working against him. Each sealed bulkhead required manual override. Each safety system needed to be bypassed. Listen, he said between labored breaths. I need you to reroute auxiliary power from sections 8 through 12 to the teaching pod's environmental controls. Buy the kid some time. That's against emergency protocols. It could destabilize the entire. Since when did protocols ever save anyone's life? Kaz'rix snapped, his patience evaporating like sweat in the inferno around him. You've got a station full of the galaxy's most advanced species. Use those evolved brains and figure it out. There was a pause, filled only by the roar of flames and the groaning of stressed metal. Then, rerouting power now. But Martinez, the smoke density is increasing. Even human lungs won't be able to handle it much longer. He knew that. Could feel it in every burning breath. The ceruleum smoke was starting to affect his vision, purple edges creeping in. But humans had something else going for them: pure, stubborn determination. Fun fact about humans, Kaz'rix grunted, forcing himself through a partially collapsed corridor. We evolved on a planet that actively tried to kill us. Predators, weather, disease, you name it. Know what we did? We said challenge accepted and kept going anyway. His tablet beeped a warning another set of fuel lines was about to rupture. He had seconds to make a decision: the longer but safer route, or the direct path through what was about to become a corridor of flame. Martinez Kaz'rix's voice was urgent. Your core temperature is approaching dangerous levels. The next section is about to. Time for another human trick, Kaz'rix interrupted, backing up a few steps. We're really good at doing stupid things to save others. Before anyone could respond, he sprinted forward and dove through the corridor just as the fuel lines burst. For a moment he was surrounded by purple fire, the heat so intense it felt like his skin was peeling off. His clothes smoldered, but the special maintenance fabric held another small victory for human engineering. He rolled to his feet on the other side, every movement agony. But he was closer now. The teaching pod was just ahead, its reinforced walls barely visible through the smoke. Martinez's multiple voices shouted through his comm. Your life signs just spiked dangerously. You need to. Save your breath, he wheezed, stumbling forward. I can see the pod. How's VLAN? The silence that followed chilled him despite the Inferno. Life signs critical. Kaz'rix finally responded. The power reroute is helping, but Martinez, even if you reach him, the return journey. Kaz'rix's laugh turned into a coughing fit. You know what else humans are good at? He reached the pod's door, his shaking hands already working on the override panel. We're really good at ignoring impossible odds. The panel sparked under his fingers, circuits melting from the heat. Behind him, more explosions were drawing closer. His vision was tunneling, lungs screaming for clean air. But through the pod's small window, he could see a small form curled in the corner, scales dulled to a terrifying gray. Hang on, kid, he muttered, ripping open the panel to access the manual release. Time to show these aliens why humans are the galaxy's best maintenance engineers. The door's mechanisms groaned in protest as he forced them to move, metal shrieking against metal. His muscles strained, tendons threatening to snap, but another uniquely human trait kicked in: the ability to tap into hidden strength reserves in extreme situations. With a final, tortured screech, the door began to slide open. Martinez Kaz'rix's voice was barely audible through the static. Whatever you're planning, make it quick. The station's structural integrity can't take much more. You've got minutes at best. Kaz'rix stared into the pod, where VLAN lay motionless. The return journey would be through even worse conditions, carrying precious cargo that couldn't survive even brief exposure to the heat and smoke. Well, he coughed, stepping into the pod. Guess it's time for the galaxy to learn about another human trait we're really bad at giving up. Inside the pod, the air was thick with toxic fumes, but at least the temperature was marginally better. Kaz'rix dropped to his knees beside VLAN, whose scales had dulled to an ashen gray, the exilith equivalent of unconsciousness. But there was still a faint pulse of color rippling beneath the surface. Still alive. Boom. Found him, Kaz'rix reported, his voice raw. But we've got a problem. He's not in the main chamber. Kid managed to wedge himself into the environmental control access port. Smart move, actually. It's the coolest spot in here. Can you reach him? Kaz'rix asked. Oh sure, if I suddenly transform into a snake. Kaz'rix's sarcasm was interrupted by another coughing fit. The access port is barely big enough for a Xylith child. No way I'm fitting in there. The station shuddered around them, and part of the ceiling collapsed in the corridor he'd just traversed. Their exit route was now blocked by burning debris. Fantastic, Kaz'rix muttered. Hey, station AI? If you're still functioning, I could use some alternatives here. The AI's voice came through, garbled, calculating. Maintenance shaft 7X connects to. Static ... emergency exit in section. Static ... probability of survival 3.8%. Those odds are getting worse, Kaz'rix observed, already pulling tools from his partially melted utility belt. Good thing I never learned basic math. He worked quickly, using his maintenance override to access the pod's systems. The environmental controls were fried, but the basic architecture was intact. Years of fixing every conceivable problem on the station had taught him how to think creatively. VLAN, he called out softly. Remember those maintenance terms we practiced? Time for a practical exam. A faint flicker of blue recognition rippled through the child's scales. That's it. Now I need you to think like a maintenance engineer. We're going to repurpose this environmental system into something new. Ever been on a water slide? The confused purple pulse in VLAN's scales almost made him laugh, despite the situation. Kaz'rix's hands moved swiftly, reconfiguring conduits and rerouting power. Kaz'rix, I need you to kill all power to Section 7D through F. Every bit of juice you can spare, reroute it here. That will accelerate the structural collapse. Trust the crazy human, just this once. There was a pause. Then the lights in the surrounding sections went dark. Kaz'rix's tablet showed a surge of power flowing into his jury-rigged system. Okay, kid, here's what humans call a crazy plan. He began dismantling the coolant system, hands shaking from oxygen deprivation. We're going to create a pressure differential in these pipes. Your species is basically one long muscle, right? Perfect for sliding through tubes. Understanding flickered through VLAN scales, followed by fear. I know. Terrifying plan from the insane human. But here's the thing about humans: our crazy plans have a weird habit of working. The station groaned ominously, and more debris crashed around them. The heat was becoming unbearable, even for his human physiology. Time was running out. Martinez Kaz'rix's voice was urgent. Whatever you're doing, do it fast. The station's automated systems are starting emergency separation procedures. If the structural integrity drops any lower, they'll jettison this entire section. Kaz'rix finished. Calculated sacrifice to save the rest of the station. Yeah, I helped install that system. Really regretting that right now. His makeshift pressure system was ready, a crazy combination of coolant pipes and emergency air supplies, creating a controlled path through the maintenance infrastructure. It would either work brilliantly or kill them both. Okay, VLAN, remember how I said humans are good at stupid things? Time to prove it. When I say now, I need you to relax completely. Let your body go limp, like practicing emergency procedures, right? A weak pulse of acknowledgement rippled through the child's scales. Kaz'rix positioned himself by the access port, one hand on the emergency release valve he'd repurposed. This is either going to be the coolest rescue ever, or the most embarrassing way to die. 50-50, really. He took one last burning breath. Kaz'rix, I'm about to break about 30 more safety protocols. Don't write them all up at once. What are you? Kaz'rix hit the release. Pressurized coolant and emergency oxygen burst through the reconfigured pipes, creating a high-pressure flow path through the maintenance system. At the same time, he reached into the access port. Now, kid. VLAN's serpentine body went slack, and Kaz'rix gave him a gentle push. The pressure differential did the rest, sucking the exilith child into the makeshift evacuation tube. Martinez, we're registering movement in the maintenance system, but these readings can't be right. Ever wonder why humans invented water parks? Kaz'rix was already moving, following the path of his jury-rigged system through the burning station. Sometimes the fun way is the only way. He ran through the Inferno, counting sections and junctions, following the flow of his makeshift rescue slide. The station's infrastructure was a maze he knew by heart: every shortcut, every bypass, every maintenance access point. Now it was a race against time, heat, and physics. Next junction in 20 meters, he wheezed. Tell me you're registering life signs. Faint but steady, Kaz'rix confirmed. The coolant is actually helping stabilize his temperature. But Martinez, the structural integrity. Another explosion rocked the station, and Kaz'rix was thrown against a wall. His shoulder made a sound that human shoulders definitely shouldn't make. Yeah, we're all going to die, he grunted, pushing himself up. Story of my life. How far to the emergency exit? 30 seconds until system separation begins. The exit is. Found it. The emergency exit panel was barely visible through the smoke, but its red outline was like a beacon. Beside it, a maintenance access panel was vibrating slightly. His makeshift pressure system had worked. Kaz'rix's trembling fingers flew over the panel, overriding safety protocols he'd helped design. "Come on, come on." The panel burst open, and in a rush of coolant and emergency oxygen, VLAN shot out like a cork from a bottle. Kaz'rix caught him, the impact sending them both sprawling. "Maintenance lesson complete," he coughed, checking the child's vital signs. The scales were already showing hints of color alive and stabilizing. The station's AI blared a final warning: emergency separation in 10 seconds. 9, 8. "Oh, shut up," Kaz'rix growled, gathering VLAN in his arms. Human adrenaline was a hell of a thing despite his injuries. Despite the toxic smoke filling his lungs, he found the strength for one final sprint. Martinez Kaz'rix's voice was frantic. "The exit seal is failing. The pressure differential." "Physics lesson," Kaz'rix shouted back. "Humans may not be the strongest, fastest, or smartest, but we're really, really good at one thing." He ran straight at the failing emergency door. Taking crazy chances. The emergency door was buckling under the pressure differential, its seal glowing red hot. Behind them, the station's automated systems continued their ruthless countdown. In Kaz'rix's arms, VLAN's scales flickered weakly between fear and trust. 3, 2. Physics lesson part 2. Kaz'rix gasped, shifting his grip on VLAN. Explosive decompression is usually bad. Usually. But sometimes. He slammed his palm against the door's manual override, his maintenance codes cutting through the last safety protocols. At the same instant, the station's separation sequence reached 0. The results were spectacular. The pressure differential, combined with the separation sequence's momentum, turned the emergency exit into a makeshift cannon. Kaz'rix and VLAN were blown through the doorway, just as the connecting corridor began to tear itself apart. They shot through the emergency decompression chamber like a bullet. Martinez Kaz'rix's voice was almost lost in the chaos. "The backup containment field is failing. You'll be pulled into." Already calculated, Kaz'rix screamed back, though he wasn't sure anyone could hear him. His free hand found the maintenance utility belt he'd never fully removed. One last tool, one last crazy human solution. The magnetic grapple standard issue for external repairs shot out, finding purchase on a support beam. The line went taut instantly, nearly yanking his arm from its socket. The pain was excruciating, but human tendons and muscles held. They swung in a wild arc through the disintegrating corridor, riding the wave of explosive decompression. Kaz'rix's lungs were on fire, his vision narrowing to a tunnel of purple-tinted darkness. But his grip on both VLAN and the grapple line never wavered. 50 meters to safe zone, someone shouted through the comm. 45. You're off course. Trust. The human Kaz'rix managed through gritted teeth. Years of maintenance work had taught him every quirk of the station's architecture, including the fact that the emergency protocols. Backup containment field activating in 4, 3. Always activated in a specific sequence. The containment field shimmed into existence like a soap bubble, catching them at the apex of their swing. For a moment, they hung suspended between vacuum and safety, between death and life. Kaz'rix's muscles screamed as he used the last of his strength to angle their trajectory. The field wouldn't hold long. It wasn't designed for this kind of stress. But it didn't need to. Sometimes he whispered to VLAN, whose scales were showing bright pulses of amazement. Being human means knowing exactly when to let go. He released the grapple line. They shot through the containment field just as it collapsed, the momentum carrying them through the final safety door. They hit the deck hard, rolling to a stop as emergency crews swarmed around them. Kaz'rix's last conscious act was to check VLAN's scales. They were already brightening, showing the iridescent patterns of life and relief. Then the purple edges of his vision finally closed in, and consciousness slipped away. His last thought was a distinctly human one. Someone else can fix those environmental controls this time. Behind them, the damaged section of the station drifted away into space, still burning with purple fire. But in the medical bay, surrounded by amazed aliens and blaring medical equipment, a human maintenance engineer, and a Xylith child had just rewritten the odds of survival. And somewhere in the station's databases, the AI was already updating its calculations about human capabilities. 3 days later, Kaz'rix sat in the medical bay, his bandaged hands wrapped around a cup of what the medical AI insisted was coffee, but tasted more like recycled engine coolant. His burns were healing well, another quirk of human physiology that had the xenobiologists buzzing with excitement. "The committee has reviewed your actions," Kaz'rix announced, their crystalline form now free of stress fractures. "They've determined that you violated exactly 47 safety protocols, broke 12 station regulations, and completely rewrote our understanding of emergency rescue procedures." "Only 47," Kaz'rix croaked, his voice still rough from smoke inhalation. "I must be losing my touch." "They're also recommending you for the highest civilian honor the station can bestow." Kaz'rix's crystals sparkled with what might have been amusement, and approved your request for those emergency bypass tunnels. All of them. A flash of iridescent scales caught Kaz'rix's attention. V-Land slithered in, his scales blazing with healthy colors. The child immediately wrapped himself around Kaz'rix's arm, a gesture that would have caused panic among the medical staff a week ago. Now, they just smiled, or their species equivalent. Hydrospanner V-Land chirped through his translator. "Quantum calibrator. Hero." "That last one's not a maintenance term," Kid Kaz'rix laughed, then winced as his ribs protested. Nojira agreed, entering with scales shimmering in patterns of deep respect. "But perhaps it should be. After all, maintaining life is the most important repair of all." Kaz'rix looked around at the beings who had once seen humans as just another spacefaring species. Now they saw something else, creatures who would run into fire, break every rule, and defy death itself to save a single life. "Well," he said, raising his terrible coffee in a toast, "someone's got to keep this station running."